Welcome, everyone, to Advantaged and Alloy Partners podcast. I'm Drew Beechler, our VP of Marketing here at Alloy, and your host of Advantaged. Alloy is a venture builder. We partner with leading organizations and entrepreneurs to co-create advantaged startups and venture studios. On the podcast, we interview corporate innovators, founders, and investors all around venture building and startup corporate partnerships, telling the story of how corporations and startups win together. This conversation is part of our Advantaged Founder Series, where we're sitting down with startup founders building startups and unpacking the edge that they have from day zero, whether that's a strategic corporate partner, platform, or new venture model. And here today, we have Ferry Tamtoro, who's the CEO and founder of Revisto. Revisto is an AI-powered platform that automates the marketing, legal, and regulatory review process for pharmaceutical companies and the agencies that serve them. Revisto is a part of the Alloy Partners portfolio, an amazing company that we helped create in partnership with a leading pharmaceutical company, bringing deep pharma operations experience with a co-creation model that's compressing what typically would take years to build into Revisto. So thank you, Ferry, so much for joining me today. I'm really excited to get into this and talk more about Revisto and pharma and AI and all things around that.
Awesome. Thank you, Drew. Yeah, thanks for having me here. Really excited for this podcast.
Maybe let's start with where you spent a lot of your early career inside large healthcare, pharma, technology organizations, companies like Amgen and Baxter and GE Healthcare, Walgreens, and then you spent the last decade founding and building startups. So tell us a little more around yourself in that journey that ultimately led you to start Revisto.
I've been in healthcare technology for about 25 years, right? Started off in medical devices, building regulated software in larger companies like GE, like Baxter, and then went to the pharma side. Initially was responsible for launching also devices there, really, but with the intent of improving medication adherence, and then also digital health products, right? And then I went over to the startup side. I co-founded a company, a technology company, prior to Revisto, that is really solving the needs of pharma and med tech in a regulated space. So from being inside and interacting with all of these organizations in the life sciences side, I've really had a chance to experience like this delays with brand launches because of the fact that this promotional material reviews is like stuck in like the 9th cycle of review, right? And so the impact of these delays are just massive, right? We're talking about patients and healthcare providers getting delayed in getting those life-saving treatments that these companies are making. We're talking about the pharma companies themselves. They're losing revenue. They're not able to capture market share from their competitors. And then of course, the people that are actually doing the reviews, the medical affairs professionals, the actual MLR coordinators, regulatory reviewers, all of these are highly trained people, right? But they're doing a lot of manual work instead of making strategic decisions for this company. So then all of this sort of just made me realize that, hey, you know what, this is a big and like invisible problem. And as it turns out, as we get deeper and deeper, the problem is even bigger now with all of the new marketing channels that are out there and the expectations from consumers for things to be real time, and then a number of just market competitive pressure.
MLR review may not seem like a flashy or sexy problem, maybe on the surface, but it has major stakes, I think, both, as you alluded to, for the teams and the pharmaceutical companies, but also to the downstream consumers that are relying on these medications in healthcare. For listeners who've maybe never sat inside pharma marketing, tell us more around what that process typically entails, why it's been so painful for so long, what the stakes really are, and then what does that look like with Revisto, and how has Revisto completely changed the game for what that looks like?
So when we talk about MLR review, which is this medical, legal, and regulatory review, it's really basically a process that starts from when a piece of content, meaning an advertisement like a brochure or a Facebook ad, when the piece of content gets created and then it goes into Viva, it gets submitted into Viva, right? This Viva is the system, think of it as like a repository for these types of contents. And then there's a formal MLR review process where this expert reviewers that comes in and reviews all of these materials, and they provide comments on the material, and then they either send it back to an internal content creator or goes back to the agency. An agency is basically like this organization outside of the pharma company that helps create this content, right? And then the agency would implement the content, they would resubmit it, and then the cycle would start again, right? Meaning the review cycle would start again. And usually this goes through this multiple cycles of reviews, and on average, it takes about a month, a little over a month to get material from submission to approval. And that's average, right? But some actually is taking over 5 months, which is like insane that it takes that long to get a piece of material out, right? There's a lot of contributors, a lot of reason for these delays and the bottlenecks for the review. For example, are the claims in this materials actually substantiated before the material gets sent for review, right? So substantiation, what that really means is that when you're making a particular statement in a piece of material, piece of brochure, is it actually backed up by evidence? Is there like a clinical trial behind it? Is there a peer-reviewed study behind it? There are also regulatory requirements, legal requirements, brand guidelines and identity, right? The color, the font, all those stuffs are aspects that needs to be inspected during these reviews. And all of these factors are really connected, right? So that's why when something needs to be revised, then everybody needs to review again because there could be an impact to their area, which is why all of these multiple iterations happen. Right? The current state of the review is completely manual. All right. So when we're talking about doing this process for a single piece of material, it probably is still doable, right? But when you're looking at volume where, let's say that there's a label update where an indication for a particular drug gets edited or gets updated, we're talking about over 700 of this materials all going at once, right? So when you're doing all of this manually, then everybody is really in this chaos state where they're trying to get everything out and reviewed quickly. And all of this is being done manually. Another pressure point is actually influencer marketing. So influencer marketing has been one of those things that a pharma company really is trying to figure out, okay, how do I get a KOL or influencer to engage with their brand, right? And if the process to get something like this out takes, I don't know, 3-4 months, that process is really frustrating, obviously, for the KOL, for the influencers. So that becomes a hurdle in actually getting even an influencer to get engaged as well. Similarly, the regulatory environment is actually also very much tightening now. That is generating a lot of untitled letters and warning letters from the FDA, which is causing actually, let's call it an overcorrection within the pharma company, right? And that in itself also creates this self-defeating cycle where you're being very cautious and then it generates more iterations and then it just keeps going back in this kind of like cycle. So this is why the ML review is such a painful process currently.
Just even the delays in the system mean millions of dollars in downstream impact to these companies. And so if you can streamline that process, it helps the organization and saves them enormous amounts of time and money that can then go back down to upstream to end consumers.
That's right. Yeah. I think there was a BCG study where it says that if you could have pharma companies really expedite that content lifecycle, you could unlock about $200 million per brand. Right? That's massive for companies.
Yeah, it's huge. It's huge. Tell us a little more around Revisto's go-to-market and where you started. There was a unique relationship in how we started with Alloy as well. We started from day one with a large pharmaceutical partner as first partner, being able to leverage and start the business in that way. How has that been valuable and strategic in the business in terms of being able to work with enterprise customers on day one and be able to learn from and build models in a platform that can scale and grow from that stage, from stage one? I think from day one, I think is really important and really interesting and unique.
So the thing that I think a lot of these tech vendors, pharma tech vendors usually get wrong is that they're trying to build about this product for pharma, but never really having any experience inside it, right? So doesn't really understand the nuances of MLR in our case, right? So you might know what MLR mean. You could probably Google them and understand medical legal regulatory review, but then you don't really know how these experts are actually discussing things during the MLR review. You don't know the nuances, the judgment calls that they have to make, the risk determination that they have to do, right? So having this partnership with the large pharma company really gave us that access to both the people and also the workflow that kind of happens within it. So we're able to understand, we're able to learn, we're able to ask questions from this expert. There's like this interaction that happens, right? And that covers all of the different types of promotional materials as well, right? Whether it be for a healthcare provider or a consumer or a payer or any different kinds of materials like a Facebook ad versus a brochure and stuff. So this is actually turning out to be extremely important in the service age of AI because it's not so much about really just using AI by itself. It's really about having that deep understanding of the problem that you're solving, that sort of like that institutional knowledge that then gets baked into the solution that you're building, right? This is also why I think what we're seeing, there were some companies that are using just LLMs to try to solve this kind of problem. It will just create a generic output, right? It will hallucinate, and it will, what's worse, it will sound smart and it will be, but yet it will be completely inaccurate, right? And so that's why through this, we were able to actually build a small language model. So we're not a generic sort of like LLM wrapper, where we have a small language model that is built specifically using that institutional knowledge, so that each brand, each type of product is given a very specific recommendation based off of their brand SOPs, based off of their approved materials and their company specific requirements.
Yeah. And so Revisto was started in 2023, which was in 2 years of AI timeline is an entire lifetime. And so you've been doing this for quite some time, relatively even in terms of particularly selling AI and building in AI, and particularly into one of the most regulated industries on earth and some of the largest enterprises in that space. What have you learned over the last couple of years? How is that evolving? I think maybe we've started to get out of this AI as just a chatbot kind of perception, especially over the last quarter, I'd say, as the coding use case has just exploded and others. We've seen that grow quite a bit more in the enterprise. But what are the biggest challenges in reality as you're seeing selling AI into large organizations like this? Then how do you communicate what the real value is and what is AI versus just a wrapper around an existing LLM?
You're right. It is in an industry that is highly regulated, and the end users that we're working with, medical, legal, regulatory, are also very detail oriented, right? And so when you're mixing that with the experience that they get when they're using ChatGPT, like an LLM out there, then the skepticism is really very much legitimate for them, right? Because they're also have this experience where this AI for pharma is really an LLM that has a pharma colored UI, let's call it, right? So the hallucination risk from all of this kind of LLM really should honestly disqualify these tools from MLR, because you can't be making up a study results that doesn't exist, or you can't be citing a claim that obviously is not actually there. So that's why when we have our small language model and it's purpose built for this MLR, it's just fundamentally different risk profile, and it's fundamentally built differently. And so what we tell our customers is that, hey, look at how this works within your workflow. So we don't just pitch the fact that, hey, we're using AI, right? Like we say, we don't ask them to just, hey, trust us based on principle that we're using AI. We say, you know what, hey, let's just use it within your workflow and do a proof of value. Yeah. So they have Viva. We've got our solution that is completely embedded and integrated within their Viva environment, so they can actually see how our product works with their materials, with their advertisements, so that they can see how it works in their workflow, right? So all of this is really key in helping them understand this change management fear, I guess let's call it. Because one of the other things that we often run into is people wonder, hey, is this going to take my job away? In reality, when they start using it, they start seeing that it's actually almost like a relief, that when they use it within their workflow, when they use Revisto within their workflow, it's actually helping them reduce a lot of manual work that we talked about earlier, right? Because they didn't really go to a pharmacy school or a law school and getting their law degree for doing all of this mechanical work that they're doing, right? There's a lot of the judgment calls and the strategic direction that they really should be spending their time on.
Yeah, it's leveling up the strategic value in nature, I think, of the work, which is really important. How much do you feel like your job is around education within these organizations? Or are you finding that more and more organizations are educated on AI to the level that they need to be? Or do you think there's a long way to go from that perspective?
Yeah, there's definitely more and more understanding of AI. There's definitely more and more acceptance. I think the experience that we're seeing is also a lot of people still think AI as just one variation, meaning, hey, when it's AI, it's equivalent to a ChatGPT or a Claude, right? But really, at the end of the day, is, hey, is it going to help me with my day-to-day work and my workflow? That's like how they should think about it, and the results that the AI is giving them, not so much that, hey, it's AI, quote unquote.
I want to go back a little bit to you mentioned change management being one of the challenges. Could you speak a little more around that? I think broadly, a lot of leaders in this space, whether they are vendors or whether they are consumers of AI software, I think are all wrestling with this conversation. Whether it's what are the jobs of the future, what do the firms of the future look like? How are you all seeing that play out within Revisto, and how do you combat those challenges or help, especially in the large organizations? Sometimes not rocking the boat, sitting with the status quo is like the choice that people are making because they don't want to make the hard decisions around change management even.
Very true, right? So change management in a lot of the customers that we work with, what we've seen successful really is that we have someone that is given ownership, or someone senior in the company that is really given ownership, an owner that really can help drive the change, right? Because until someone is actually given that authority and ownership and say that, hey, you know what, let's just try it out, right? It's not saying that we're gonna make a change in the entire organization's workflow. We're talking about starting with this contained, measurable area, workflow, and be able to quickly measure KPIs and get the ROI, right? So an example of MLR, the KPIs are very clear. We can measure the cycle counts, right? We can measure how many days it takes to get to approval, right? And the rework rate, right? So it makes it easier for us to be able to prove this ROI in weeks, not even quarters. We're talking about weeks, right? That is one thing that I think we find really useful and really helpful for organizations to help combat that sort of change management. The other thing that we've also been hearing about is that, and we work with our customers on this, is that, hey, don't just focus on doing pilots, right? So there's this thing called pilot paralysis. There are a lot of organizations that are like so excited about doing AIs and they're just doing pilots all over the place. You have to make sure that there's continuity, right? So before you even start the pilot, make sure that that owner has the decision to actually take it forward and actually expand within the organization, right? Because that's how you build that change management throughout the rest after you see initial success and results.
Are you seeing a specific job title or function work better than others at being that owner, whether it's a chief AI officer, or is it the business unit leaders that feel the most impact day to day and in the change within their business? Or where are you seeing that work well within organizations that are able to move faster, maybe, or more flexible, more nimble? What is the structure within that specifically of the ownership, directly responsible individual that you have found works the best or you think works the best?
Yeah, I think I'm sure it's going to be different for different companies. For Revisto, given the space that we're in, it's such a cross-functional process, right? MLR is such a cross-functional process. So usually what we found successful is basically the owner of that process. So that falls in, this is different organizations, but usually it falls either in marketing operations, meaning the marketing organization that is actually driving the efficiency of the process, or the other place is in regulatory, which is the owner of the process. But in either of those cases, really the owner of the process, because they have this intimate knowledge of both, not just the process itself, but the impact and the benefits that it can bring, right? So they can be the champion that says that, hey, we're going to pick this particular brand and we're going to try it on this brand. And this is our KPIs. This is how we're going to measure success. I know who the executives that I need to talk to and then present the business case.
Are you seeing an increase in chief AI officers in titles or AI offices within large healthcare and pharmaceutical companies as well?
Yeah, definitely. And the AI officers or the AI leads or innovation leads, they're always involved, right? Because they bring this perspective that, hey, the traditional method of doing things manually, maybe it could be improved by using technology and using AI, right? So the owner, let's call it the marketing operations or the regulatory owner, then partners with the AI lead and really understands the technology side of things, understand the data side of things, right? There's the data privacy, of course, that we have to consider within these companies. And there's the AI governance and the processes that we usually work with as well within these large pharma companies.
I think another one of the tensions we see often within large enterprises is the buy versus build decision. Big companies have resources, they have large IT teams. Why not just build it ourselves? How do you combat that argument, especially when you're selling into these same orgs that could theoretically replicate a lot of what you all do, especially as AI makes, as we think about software development, increasingly more accessible to the average person?
Yeah, we definitely do run into those questions, right? Hey, we have the resources, like you said, why not just build it ourselves, right? And when we start getting into those discussions, usually the build argument sounds reasonable until you actually do the math, let's call it, right? So when you think about the average time to build a production grade MLR system. And we're talking about one that has direct integration into their workflow. We're talking about one that can accurately do substantiation of claims and understanding what is a fair balance and net impression, all that stuff, right? And the audit trail, we're talking about at least 3 years and probably costing them, what, $8-10 million because of all of the regulations and understanding and the nuances, right? You compare and contrast that with the proof of value that I was just talking about with Revisto, and we can get it done in 4 to 6 weeks, right? It's 4 to 6 weeks versus 3 years. And okay, how much money are they losing in the market when they want to wait for 3 years? Or even, let's just say, be generous and say 2 years, right? And it's not only the build cost, right? It's also the maintenance that a lot of people forget about.
Yeah, it's going to be someone's full-time job to maintain that, at least.
That's right. FDA guidances, they change all the time. OPDP has make updates, or there's label revisions to their drugs, right? And so it can't be just like, oh, this is a fun build project, I'm going to do it once, and then we're all saying hooray and gotta forget about that, right? And then the other angle is the competitive intelligence angle, right? When we look at the agencies and the pharma companies that are automating this MLR process and able to run so many different campaigns much faster and testing them in the market, that having like that industry level knowledge and benchmark gives them an ability to actually have a competitive differentiator, right? And so it's not just cost, but it's also truly a market differentiation capability out there.
Could you tell me a little more around the value that there is in working with a software provider? Or we see this often too when we work with large companies that maybe we just want to build this software and just keep it in-house, just keep it for us to use. But it becomes, in situations, I think, like with Revisto, it becomes 10x more valuable when it's not just your company using the software, but to your point, it's like some of that competitive side of things too, and like the feedback and the learning loop, where if it's across your industry, it's 10 times more valuable. Is that an argument that you are often making or combating against? And how do you think about that specifically a lot when you're talking to companies and to prospects?
Yeah, definitely, right? So when you think about the MLR space, one of the things that matters a lot is also understanding within the same therapeutic area, right? Multiple products within the same therapeutic area. How do your competitors basically project themselves out to the market? What's the risk level that they're willing to accept? And how do they compare with kind of like the messages that you're sending or you're communicating out there, right? So having that ability to know and also be able to iterate quickly, because know what your competitors are saying and then be able to iterate your messages quickly becomes an ability for them to win the market and capture higher market share, which for some of these drugs are talking about hundreds of millions of dollars, especially some of the drugs that are maybe close to getting off patent, right? Or a drug that has a very well-established brand on the market and new players trying to get in, right? So a lot of situations out there that becomes very critical for the brand leaders to have this.
I think that's an important point and something that people often overlook as well when they think about even back to buy versus build decision and what do we keep in-house versus share externally. Shifting gears just a little bit, you mentioned this a little bit earlier, and so just around broader pharmaceutical and marketing trends, the FDA is now using AI a lot more even to review content. We've seen a lot more warning letters over the past 6 months as a result. Influencer marketing in pharma is exploding, creating different kinds of challenges and pressures as well on the MLR timeline. How does this evolving landscape impact Revisto as a whole? And what are you seeing from the macro level around pharmaceutical marketing trends happening, particularly here in the US, I think, but how is that impacting Revisto and where you see the future for the company and pharmaceutical marketing as a whole?
This is definitely a very hot topic in the industry or in the space that we're in, because like you said, there are literally hundreds of warning letters now, like over 100 warning letters that came out in just the past few months. And what's really interesting is that it's not just the number of warning letters, it's the why, right? It's like, why are they increasing all of a sudden? It's because the FDA's sort of like enforcement capabilities, they're getting more and more sophisticated and more systematic, right? FDA is modernizing their review infrastructure with AI, right? They're using AI to assist with finding all of this stuff, right? Which brings in a lot more consistency. So it's not really so much that the standard or the regulations is changing or shifting, right? But it's the probability of getting caught is actually now higher because their FDA is using advanced technology, let's call it, to actually detect and find all. But what that also tells us is that this is really almost like a structural shift. It's not like hey, this is just the cycle and in the next 3 years is going to change again. No, right? Because once the technology is adopted, that's how it's going to go and be like that moving forward. So the good thing is within Revisto, we're already building for this environment, right? We built with this mindset that we understand that, hey, when we're looking at this industry, is going to go into this direction of just more and more scrutiny, not less, right? When the FDA is using AI, then you as a pharma company really should be using AI as well to make sure that you're able to either keep up and expedite your process. The example that we talked about earlier with the influencer and the KOL marketing, that's also another problem that nobody has really fully solved yet with the delays that we have. And the problem there is not that it's not the creative side of things, it's the compliance timeline, right? So if you can speed up that video production of an influencer or KOL from, 3 to 4 months to just a couple of days, then it becomes much more valuable, right? And also lower risk, going back to the regulatory environment that we're in as well.
You talked about this a little bit earlier too, but just it's keeping in the same vein around Revisto growth and kind of future and where you're headed. Share a little more on your go-to-market evolution over the last couple of years as well. Now you're working also on the agency side of things. And when did you make that strategic decision? When did it feel right for the business? I think startups and founders oftentimes struggle with this focus versus new opportunity. And how do you evaluate those as a multi-time founder, especially? But I'm curious, this is a great specific case study around when was the right timing and how did you think about starting to expand the business and move into adjacent, if you will, markets?
It's been very interesting, right? Yeah, like you said, we started off really working much more focused on the pharma and the life sciences company. And as we got deeper and deeper into it, we were learning that, hey, you know what? This actually the problem or this pain that we're talking about is actually existing on both sides simultaneously, right? So one is inside the pharma company, the MLR team, and then the other side is on the agency side, where the account team, meaning the account team within the agency side, they're also drowning in this status management and implementation of these comments that they're getting back, right? So when we looked into it, actually, when we're solving the problems on both sides, the agency side and the pharma side, our solution actually becomes stickier, right? Because the agencies, they don't want to just keep having this multiple iterations. What they want to do is be able to produce high quality content, right? And they want to be able to differentiate based on the outcome that they're delivering, right? Not really, hey, I'm going to just keep iterating and churning on this for hours and hours, right? So then having this slow MLR process actually delays the ability for that campaign to get pushed out the door and measure that outcome. So then the other thing that we're seeing now is that, hey, we almost have this closed loop system where when we have both the pharma and the agency, feedback that we're getting from the pharma side, let's say they use Revisto, they interact with it, they're providing feedback from the pharma side. Those feedback can then get fed back into the agency side, right? So then the agency now is producing even better content. And then that cycle becomes a closed loop system that just keeps churning out higher and higher quality content.
It makes total sense. And the opportunity to live on both sides of that ecosystem is huge. To wrap up some of this conversation, this has been an incredible conversation. I love getting to sit down and talk with you, Ferry. Share maybe some words of wisdom or advice that you would have for other founders, maybe particularly through the lens that are either in pharma or healthcare or a heavily regulated industry building with AI, and just what kind of advice would you have for other founders building in similar spaces?
Yeah, I think especially in the regulated space, don't let this urgency around AI push you into building something that is generic, right? Because in a regulated space, you really have to understand the nuances and the domain expertise and the regulations and how the real operators within those companies actually work. Right? In our case, in the pharma space, in the life sciences space, that co-creation model, it's not a nice to have. It's really crucial in order to build something that the industry will actually trust. And trust is really the foundation of selling into a regulated space.
Yeah, I think that's so important. It's a great word of wisdom to end on. So thank you, Ferry, so much for joining me today. This was an incredible conversation. Hopefully we'll get to do another one of them in a handful of years and see where things have gone with Revisto at that point.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me here.